Margaret, right? We are Elizabeth. Victor. No, this is Vanessa. So who's Margaret Curran? Sorry.
She was in the room because she walked in with me.
So is it okay to just say Margaret Curran? Do I have to say honorable? If it's a former MP, you say honorable, right? I'm so bad at
Margaret.
this.
She can tell you. Yeah.
Hi, Margaret. So forgive me because I'm just so bad at this sort of things. Yeah. So we just say Margaret. Just,
In the UK, they've got all the sorts of paraphernalia, but I could never be bothered with that.
just give us 2 minutes because it's just trying to usher people in. Maybe you want to make yourself comfortable around here. Okay. Do you have enough water? No, but because you're going to go and walk up here anyway. But feel free to take the mic and walk around too. Yes, okay. Okay, great. Okay, guys. So if the speakers can just sit over here and I'll call you one by one. Okay, welcome back. For the next session, you're going to listen to 5 speakers. Now, I know you have the program, so I won't repeat what the topics are. But what I wanted to emphasize is these are speakers who are going to share with you some living examples, what they have done in their own context. We are not saying that this is the perfect solution, please, because we all have our own context. But what we wanted to know was to see how they worked in their own context, what were the challenges, and how it was fairly successful in their own context, and see what we can learn from them. And perhaps they too can learn from us. Because as we said earlier on, there are at least 1,000 years of experience in this room. So we are only presenting these as documented cases, living cases. The term that was used was living cases. And so please bear in mind that they are not the perfect solution, but you may want to take some takeaways and ask questions. There won't be a Q&A after every speaker. However, at the end, we're going to have a couple of questions only. But I want to remind everyone that all these 5 topics, will be broken into work groups later on. So each of the speakers will join your work groups. Now you may ask what work group you're in. During lunchtime, you sign up to be in which work group. So when you're listening to the speakers, so it's not a popularity contest, no. There are only about 15 to each group. So you sign up and you go to the work group, and the speaker will be there either chairing or as a resource person. But just really have a conversation around the topic of what the speaker is saying, has said in the earlier session. Creating positive change for gender equality, looking at the environment. So at the end of 5 speakers, there'll be a couple of questions. We break for lunch, and then at lunchtime, you sign up for your work groups, and you'll see your speakers again in your respective work groups. Again, there will be people who escort you to the lunch area. But I'll give you more instructions around that later on, because we're trying to take over the whole parliament, right, today, including the buildings. So without further ado, may I speak? May I call on? Can I invite our first speaker, Ms. Margaret Curran, who's a former minister, who's insisting I shouldn't say honorable, so I'm really glad. So, Ms. Margaret, please start your presentation. Wait, hang on.
I'll say that again.
Okay. Yes.
Honourable friends, Westminster Foundation for Democracy, the Commonwealth Partnership for Democracy, and all of you here, I am so excited to be with such a group of women today. And we had chocolate too. What more could we ask for? It is a great honour to be here because it's such an important theme in all our countries, and to learn from each other is so exciting. I have been a member of the UK Parliament. I've also been a member of the Scottish Parliament and was there when it was established in 1999 and was a minister in the Scottish Government. And more recently, I have been working as an international consultant across the world, in the Middle East and North Africa and in Asia, and largely focusing on governance and the advancement and equality of women. I have been active in politics for well over 40 years and now use my experience not only to help young women, but to help all women advance in politics. And all my politics, ever since I was a teenager when I started getting involved, has been governed by one simple truth. And that is parliaments are incomplete and governments ineffective without the equal involvement and empowerment of women. And when we look at the progress that's been made, and we've still got a long way to go, but we should recognise the progress that has been made. And we've got to ask ourselves why. We have governments now in countries as diverse as Ethiopia and Canada, where we have equal numbers of women and men in the cabinets. Over half the countries in the world have some form of quota or mechanism to advance women into parliament. So we have to ask ourselves, why have we got this progress, albeit maybe not as much as we would want? And there is increasing evidence about why we've got it. We know that when parliaments involve certain levels of women within them, that enhances the credibility and the legitimacy of that parliament. It gives that parliament more authority to reach out to the people it represents and makes its voice more credible. We also know that more women being involved in reasonable numbers, over 30%, is a hallmark of political modernisation. And we also know, again with considerable research and evidence, that when you have women involved in parliaments and in governments, the policy and legislation of those institutions improve. More women have put new policies on the agenda. Childcare, as we learned about here in Malaysia this morning, but also sexual violence. I remember being active in politics in the late 1970s and being very easily dismissed by people in my own party, telling me that the issues of childcare and sexual violence were not real political issues and weren't really a matter for government. But we also know, as the World Economic Forum has recently indicated, that including women in decision-making about national financial systems has shown to drive sustainable economic growth. And when we educate girls, we know that that helps develop long-term gains in national living standards and institutional performance. Now, when we look at that progress and we see the numbers of women advancing in national parliaments, there is one overriding conclusion to draw. There is one standout factor, and that is women won't access political decision-making and political power by accident. Women won't access political power just by asking politely. Women have to organise to get political power. And across different political systems, different political cultures and values, it's proven that one of the most successful ways to advance women is to introduce some form of mechanism to make up and compensate for the generations of historic disadvantage that women had faced. Now I want to just in a few moments just talk about my own personal case study, and that's the British Labour Party. In 1979, when I was active in politics, we had a woman Prime Minister, a very significant woman, Margaret Thatcher, who really made an impact on the world stage. But it illustrated to us, no matter how effective your role model may be, and role models are important, but it's not enough. That it wasn't just about one woman we wanted to advance in political power, we wanted all women to be part of that. And one woman wasn't enough, because the representation of women in Parliament at that time stood only at 3%. In 1987, 8 years later, it was only 6%. Now it's 34% in the UK Parliament. So I would argue in a generation, we've made decisive moves forward. And when you ask yourself why that is, it is about looking at mechanisms. In the Scottish Parliament, when we were set up, we decided in the Labour Party we wanted equal representation. So we had 50-50 representation in the Scottish Parliament, again making that a standout parliament in terms of women's representation. In the British political system, you may know, there was never any real appetite, and we couldn't get support for legal quotas in the Parliament itself. So we decided that we had to argue within the Labour Party to create our own mechanism. That as that generation of women, we just weren't prepared to take the hundreds of years it would have taken to get equal representation. So we drove the change through party mechanisms, and we created a system of women-only shortlists where only women can stand in certain seats, and largely it's been recognised as effective. We faced a lot of opposition in introducing that, and at the time that opposition was fairly fierce. But actually now, I think we've won the argument. I think in the party it is well established that it is right to advance women in this way, and it's right to look at those mechanisms. So when I look back, just to draw my remarks to conclusion, when I look back and think, what were the factors that drove our success? What were the big issues that we should really look on? I could talk about it for hours, but I've only got a couple of minutes. But I would draw your attention to 3 points that I think were useful. One was, over the years, we supported women working together, and we found the means to bring women together. You have to develop your own voice. You have to learn, you have to network, you have to develop your own leadership. And we worked with women within the party, within the wider trade union movement, but also within wider society. We also reached out to our allies, both men and women, and organised and marshalled those allies to come and speak in our support. And we encouraged them to show their support, to speak up for us when we were under attack. But I suppose most importantly, perhaps, we overcame the opposition. Some of it we did by persuasion, and some of it because we just defeated them, I think. We heard a number of arguments along the way. We kept getting told we only select people on their merit and not their gender. You know, we had to spend a lot of time showing we can prove we've got capable women. There are lots of capable women, and don't ever let anybody tell you that you're short of capable women. So we argued and proved them on that point. We were also told that it's not the right time. Well, it's never the right time, according to those who oppose us. It will always be the right time, and we just weren't prepared to wait any longer for other priorities to take place. And we were always told, yes, we support you, but other priorities were more important. Can I tell you, you will not solve those other priorities unless you get women involved in part of that resolution. So we were helping address those other priorities. So I wish you very well in this conference. As I say, it's been very exciting to be part of it. I think the time that we spent working with each other, coming to conferences, coming to speak to each other, was time very well spent. I don't think you realise it at the time, but this is how you actually develop women's confidence, develops women's voice, and develop women's leadership. And I'm so excited now to be working internationally to help women come forward in the way that I did in my own country. We have to hold on to that simple truth. The involvement of women in politics is non-negotiable. It is an absolutely fundamental human right. When you're standing up for yourself, you're standing up for millions of other women in your own country across the world. We have the answers, and our countries need us to give them those answers. So I wish you well, and hold on to that truth that we need women in politics. And I look forward to seeing you all advance in the future. Thank you very much.
Hello, yeah. Thank you, Margaret. My ears pricked up when you said that you worked with the larger civil society, i.e. the women's movement, because we all know that only with autonomous, independent women's movement will women's rights be secured. The questions that you have for Margaret, you can have it later after the 5 speakers, but also put down the questions when you go into the work groups. So, we may not be able to tackle all the questions, we only have an hour for the session. Our next speaker is from Tunisia, but also with the Westminster Foundation, Mr. Najib Jeridi. Yes, am I pronouncing it correctly? No. Jeridi, okay, right. Thank you. Who's the country representative in Tunisia from Westminster. Thank you, Najib.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And allow me, on behalf of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, to extend a warm welcome to you. First of all, I will start by introducing myself, as my name is Najib Jeridi. Is it fine now? Nice. And I'm the country representative of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy in Tunisia since 2011. Today, I'm delighted to be here and to tell you about the experience of my country in changing laws and policies for gender equality. Through this presentation, that I will go through the key changes that have been achieved until today, and my objective is to try and share with you some of the conclusions that we have reached in Tunisia on how these changes has been achieved. The presentation goes through the key steps, and through that I will try to show mainly that those changes have been achieved thanks to 4 elements. The first is that the religious scholars and imams have been the ones who guided and facilitated most of these changes. The second is that another element, which is the audacity of the politicians, who believe that the laws and the policies have to guide the social change and not just to follow it. Otherwise, the change is very difficult to achieve or could not have been achieved at all. The third is that the efforts of the civil society have put the pressure on the law and policy makers, and thus these have been able to do those changes. And finally, most of the changes have been achieved by the initiative of men or have been led by men, not by women. Let me first start by specifying that Tunisia is a country where 99% of the population is Muslim and speaks the same language, which is Arabic. We used to be a French colony until 1956, date of our independence. And in this slide, the first one, I have enumerated the key changes on laws and policies that has been achieved since the middle of the 19th century. Then, with the independence of Tunisia and the promulgation of the Code of Personal Status in 1956, then the different pieces of legislations that followed that and ensured further protection for women. But of course, I will not go through all of them one by one. The time is not enough. So I will focus only on the most important ones. First of all, the reform movement for gender equality started in the middle of the 19th century, so during the colonization period, and was led at the time by the imams and the scholars of the Zaytuna Great Mosque. One of those imams was the Sheikh Tahir al-Haddad, who was the most daring one and who had the most daring reflections on gender equality in Tunisia. In 1930, he published his book, a very famous one, called Our Woman in Sharia and in Society. And in this book, he considered that the inequality from which the women suffer is not the result of the Islamic divine rules, but of the human jurisprudential doctrines, al-madahib al-fiqhiyya, and their application by Muslims. The key reforms that Tahir al-Haddad called for that resulted from this way he presented things are first, the strict prohibition of polygamy, then the women's right to choose their husband and their right to divorce, and the equality in inheritance, among other things, of course. Based on those thoughts, mainly of Sheikh Tahir al-Haddad and of others, we have adopted our first Code of Personal Status. It was the first piece of legislation that has been adopted after the independence. Those thoughts has been adopted first by the party that brought the independence to Tunisia, the Dastoor Party, and its leader, the first prime minister at the time, Bourguiba. And that was the first legislation to be adopted that shows its importance. And here I want to emphasize one thing. which is that the person who was behind that code and who overseen its production was the Sheikh Tahir Jayet, the one who is standing behind the Prime Minister with the glasses, and who was one of the biggest ulama of the Zitouna Great Mosque. So another time, a man and a religious person who was behind those changes. The main values on which the code has been based were first the science of the purposes of Sharia, which is maqasid Sharia, and the theory of blocking excuses. The code was then described by its authors and by the society as jurisprudence, a new jurisprudence, breaking up with the old jurisprudence, but still within the frame of the Islam. The key legal reforms that has been adopted by this new code was four ones. The first is the prohibition of polygamy since 1956 by law this time. And second one is the marriage became a civil contract, and any other form of marriage became a crime punishable by law. The third is that the right to divorce became equal to both spouses and can only be met in court. The fourth is that women have the right to choose their husbands and to marry themselves by themselves. They do not need their parents or brothers, etc. Later, a number of pieces of legislation has been adopted, and the key ones were the law on sharing properties between spouses, the law on domestic violence recently, and the reforms allowing women to marry a man from other faiths. I will focus a bit on this law on the elimination of all forms of violence against women that has been adopted in July 2017, and to stress the fact that this specific law have been adopted thanks to the CSO's efforts that led to the adoption of a law which ensures a comprehensive protection for women from all kinds of violation. And in addition to that, it made the state responsible for two other things, which is the prevention of domestic violence and the assistance to the victims of domestic violence. The civil society called for the adoption of the law. Then it have participated in its drafting in partnership with the Ministry of Women Affairs. It lobbied for its adoption within the parliament and is now lobbying for the implementation of all its content. The civil society praised the adoption of the domestic violence law, but is not fully satisfied, but they have made it clear to the politicians that the gender equality is a priority for them and for the society. And the lesson has been captured by the politicians, including the President of the Republic, the current President of the Republic, who recently, on July 2017, expressed his will to go further on gender equality and to specifically on the inheritance full equality. And he has created a consultative committee of experts that we call the Qolib in Tunisia, a very famous one now. The Qolib, commonly known as the Committee of Bushra Belhaj Ahmida, its leader, the lady which is dressed in green in this photo. Bushra Belhaj Ahmida is an MP, but she has as well a long history as a civil society activist. The committee presented its report last summer in 2018 and called mainly for two elements, which is granting daughters equal rights to sons in the distribution of inheritance, rather than applying the one male equal to two female rule, which is currently adopted. The President of the Republic took that proposal and presented a draft legislation to amend the inheritance law by establishing equality, of course, and the draft law is now being considered by the Parliament and negotiated all over the society. This brings me to the end of my presentation, so thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Najib. Thanks for keeping in time. I think the timekeeper doesn't have to do much timekeeping at all, but he's over there. And it's very exciting to know that you all are tackling inheritance laws. I'm sure we have a lot of questions around that. For our next speaker, it's our very own Maria Chin Abdullah from Malaysia, who will be talking about changing mindsets. Yes. Maria.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Good morning to everyone. Is YB Hannah still around? Oh, yes. YB Hannah Yeoh. Thank you very much to the Westminster Foundation for Democracy for giving me this opportunity to speak. And also all the very important people, YBs and all, and every one of you. Thank you for coming here. What I'm going to talk about is that whenever we want to talk about women's political participation, we have to deal with gender equality and non-discrimination. For me, that is fundamental. While we give a lot of recognition, a lot of people are saying that, you know, we have actually advanced quite well in Malaysia, but there are still lingering questions that we still need to answer. There are more female graduates than male presently in Malaysia, but why are we having more men being hired and promoted so that inevitably there are fewer women in positions of leadership? And why are we still not developing and properly including the talents of 50% of our population? And why is it that, you know, for the past 20-odd decades, women's political participation is still at 10%? We only increased it at the last election. To me, I think that to bring about real change, we must look beyond just the workplace and also beyond laws and policies to really address the root cause of gender inequality, focusing on how and where discrimination and stereotyping is holding women back and girls as well, and why men have to behave the way they do. This bias starts from birth, sometimes before, and operates in families everywhere. And it continues to operate throughout the life. And there are limits set in binary forms. Stereotypes are used to hold back women, and often in places with unrealistic expectations. There are ways in which there are restrictions, and it continues down the generation. And these entrenched attitudes interact with policies, laws, specific sectors, initiatives, and limit their effectiveness. And why am I saying all this? It has a big impact on the kind of policies and laws that we actually even bring to the parliament and even to the state assembly level. Ignoring the gender norms or social rules that have for generations defined what people are allowed to do not only hinders progress, but can create further resistance and backlash against women and girls pressing for change. And discriminatory gender norms can be challenged. Power imbalances between men and women can be changed, but they must be confronted, and they have to be confronted now. I just want to share my experience. I come from a civil society background, particularly from the women's rights movement. It has been in existence, or rather my involvement with that has actually been for 33 years. We started off in 1985, and we had our first two-day workshop on violence against women. And that was also the time that gave birth to 5 other women's rights groups. And to date, we actually are still together in a coalition on joint action group for gender equality. 33 years of a coalition of women's rights movement. And what have we done, actually? It is not just about talking on women's violence against women or women's political participation, but we actually expanded to challenge some of the social norms that hold back women and girls. We actually went into determining how we want to challenge the mindsets through our advocacy work. So what we did was that we did a lot of campaigns, public protests. Of course, we went to the streets, wrote articles, even wrote our own laws, how we want sexual harassment to be, how we want the domestic violence to be, how we want rape laws to be. Simply because we want the right perspective, the right narrative to be included in the laws. Because if we don't, then there will be consequences not on us as lawmakers and all that, but on those who actually get raped, on those who actually suffer from domestic violence, if you do not have strong laws and policies. Joint Action Group also had a lot of lobby to actually gain our allies, as well as also tackle groups that actually don't really quite understand or reject gender equality and non-discrimination to some extent. That engagement actually helped. It helped to build the narrative for the concept of gender equality. What do we mean? And it also, Jack also actually lobbied key decision makers, private sectors, the government, the NGOs, the politicians, the political parties, you name it, they went to all of them. And to actually help to build allies and also to build the narrative for gender equality and non-discrimination. And as a result of their effort, there are some shifts in terms of the belief and how they look at violence against women, for instance. Yeah, there is now a recognition that there is violence against women. There is also a change in the women's reality and narratives from zero support to women speaking out against violence against women. There are groups like Jack, there are even younger women who are forming their own groups and coming out and speaking on women's rights issues. And Jack itself has also gained recognition in being consulted by the various sectors. And it also changed some of the narrative, not all, some of the narratives of the government policies and laws. And particularly for a long time, yeah, we've been struggling, and it's now included in the 10th Malaysia Plan, CEDAW being recognized as an instrument to be integrated into laws and policies under the 10th Malaysia Plan. And we also managed to gain attention from private corporations, and particularly like Body Shop and many others, who actually now start talking about the causes of the women's movement. These are positive changes, yeah, where the women's group have actually consistently, persistently fought and struggled for many, many years to ensure that laws and policies reflect the women's realities. And that is very important. But sometimes our battle seems to be going backwards as well. Because last year, in the recent parliament debate, when we were talking about child marriage, there is some retreat in terms of how we look at child marriage, where for the women's rights groups, it is very straightforward. There are the federal laws that actually handle child marriage. But I think that, you know, the narrative has not gone through. It's kind of lost in the space of time. And so now what we have is that from dealing with child marriage at the federal level, we have actually passed it on to the state level. And the state level usually do not handle criminal matters. But now we have actually given powers at the state level to decide on whether state accept or do not accept child marriages. And that for me is a red flag. Because for a long time, we have actually struggled very much at the federal level to deal with violence against women. So now it is a battle that we all have to fight together to actually determine, yeah, what is it that we want for girls? What is it that we want for women? And how do we protect them through our laws and policies? And to actually take bold steps, very bold steps, to actually deal with sensitive issues. And I think that, this is the time. This is the opportunity, especially after 9th of May, where we have actually a new opportunity to change things, to change the way we work, to change the way government work, and to change the beliefs that we are holding and we need to challenge. And I feel that, as a member of parliament, it is definitely an uphill battle for me. On the one hand, I have to answer to the women's rights movement, and at the same time, I also have to deal with some of the issues that are coming up in Parliament. So I feel that, when we actually talk about women's political participation, let us not forget that for people to actually come into power, we really need to have a narrative that actually helps to support them. A narrative that is fair, that is talking about the non-discrimination, that is talking about the equality that women want as well as men themselves want all these things as well. It's a big battle that we have in front of us, but it is not a losing battle. It is never a losing battle. Because I believe that we can actually do it, and we have to do it together, and we have to actually get more allies on board to talk about gender equality, to talk about non-discrimination, so that we will be able to draft better laws and better policies. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, you turn it on. Okay. Thank you for also reminding us that, if you want to have women in power, women in sitting in MP seats, including the Prime Minister's seat, we need to make sure that the family law, the violence against women laws, and all of that has to be sorted out, have to be right. The environment has to be right, not only outside, but within the family too. I'd like to now invite Dr. Vanessa Ogden from the Mulberry School for Girls, based in the UK, to talk about investing in girls.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a great privilege to be here. And what I hope I can contribute today is just one example of many that are out there about how it's really important to invest in girls. If we really want women's political leadership and economic empowerment to be established universally right across the world as a global human right, then we need to think about girls and invest in women early on. And I stand here today as an advocate of that. The importance of preparing women through girls' education really starts with a set of values. And I think that one of the things that I realised when sitting down as a new head teacher of Mulberry School for Girls and thinking about what is it that we really want for young women right at the end of their education when they leave us, we have to think about what we're there for. And I think a set of values, a philosophy of change is really important. The curriculum, what is taught. Sometimes those things are influenced by government, but to an extent as the head teacher you have a certain amount of freedom as to how to deliver them. The exam system is given to you. Do you have exams for selection or do you have them for recognising achievement? To an extent, those things are given to you by government, but how you enact them is really important. And so I really firmly believe that the schools that we have are where civilizations are formed. And if we really, really want great leadership, then we have to think about the voice and the visibility and the power of choice that you give the children that leave you, and in this case, especially young women. So I started with what I regard as a real central question when you're planning any education for young women. That is, how do we equip girls with knowledge, skills, and attributes and dispositions to enable a young woman, when she leaves you, to be, first of all, confident in her identity. And her identity will intersect along the way with different aspects of herself: gender, race, faith, culture, and class. So that's the first thing, how to be confident in who you are and to stand up for what you believe in, being everything that you want to be as a young woman leaving a great school. The second thing is, how do you enable a young woman to be able to negotiate for herself? I mean, there are so many competing demands in every context that a woman faces. So how do you manage the roles that sometimes change from day to day? You may start as a mother in the morning. You may go to work and be a different leader. You may come back and have to do all sorts of things, caring for elders, for example. And across your lifetime, your roles will change. You know, motherhood at some stages and leading in other contexts at others. They all change across the piece. So how do you enable a woman to leave your education and be able to negotiate all those things skillfully? In the end, to have the third thing. And the third thing is the power of choice. It's absolutely essential for young women to leave your education that you offer in a school to her with the power of choice in her life and the skills to be able to determine that for herself. And one very important ingredient in that is to be able to do that without necessarily disrupting what can be a very, very delicate balance of power in your community and family home. Now, I want to say something a little bit about context, because context is really important here. When you go in to think about the school that you're leading, the education that you want to create, you have to think very carefully about context. And context changes. And I speak as someone who is relatively privileged in the world with a state education system that is funded by government, and of course that's not the case everywhere. But the inequalities in the UK are quite stark, and I think it's important to recognise this. As societies are more successful, wealthy and prosperous, the inequalities extend. And so where I do teach, where I have established the work that I've done with my great team of staff, has not been one of the easiest contexts for people. I have an absolutely brilliant, wonderful, warm community of families. Parents who want their best for their children, parents who really have to struggle quite often with quite difficult circumstances, overcrowding. There is poverty. Not everybody is affected by it, but certainly a very significant number of people in my community where I live and work, where I work, not where I live, but where I work. It's incredibly important that I think carefully about that. And there is a faith and cultural context to this as well. Our borough, where our families live, is very diverse. But in my school and in the schools that I serve, predominantly most of my families are practicing Muslims and of Bangladeshi heritage. And it brings with it a very rich cultural wealth that we use to the best of our ability in school to support what we do. And understanding that brilliance and that potential is incredibly important. So what we did as a team was we thought about 4 principles for education. So the first principle that we have, and although it's listed under confidence, creativity, leadership and love of learning as the last, it is of course the most important, and the other 3 underpin that. What we really want are young women leaving us really well qualified, because without your qualifications, it becomes very difficult. That's the purpose of your school, is to have brilliantly qualified young people that leave you. So working extremely hard to ensure that teachers are really well trained. And I think that's one of the key things for any education system, is how well you train your teachers. Now, we have developed what I would call a sort of virtual college of education. So on the next slide, it shows you that there is a sort of college of education, if you like, but it's virtual. It doesn't really exist as a building, but it exists virtually within the school. And we offer all sorts of different ways of qualifying teachers at different stages of their career. That's all offered within school amongst ourselves. We've extended this across a family of schools now that we have, but it's critical that the teachers that you have are the best at what they do. And so offering opportunities to ensure that at whatever level they are, whether it's as a new teacher, whether it's as someone leading a subject area, or whether it's a prospective head teacher, we offer them the best range of experiences and chances to get the knowledge that they need to develop, and sometimes to send them out on work shadowing placements where we can. But most of this is done within school. So great teaching, great qualifications, and the ability to go out and be a well-qualified person bidding for leadership is what we aim for. The next principle that we have then, therefore, focuses on the confidence to do that. Because building self-esteem, as we all know from all of the research about projects working with girls globally, self-esteem and confidence are critical, and it's no exception, I think, wherever you are. So we really look to tackle confidence. We look to opportunities that we offer for platforms for public speaking, other kinds of experience across a 5 to 7 year education, to enable girls to learn to meet challenge or to be able to challenge themselves, to be able to understand that people will come at you with opposition, and to be able to recruit support. So to our other speakers' earlier points, to be able to recruit the support for yourself and to be able to withstand challenge comes from your confidence. Now, on the next slide, we talk about walking the sisterhood journey together. In talking about facing down opposition, one of the things that we have to do amongst our community and our families is to challenge Islamophobia. There is plenty of Islamophobia in the press. And so in order to be able to leave school confident that you can do that, having points that we find where young women can take that platform and speak for themselves and often face down those kinds of very toxic, insidious stories that often sit within the press that erode confidence, to actually be able to lead on the challenge is really important. So this is just one example of one of the ways in which we have done this. But there are many, and they're not always so public, and often the hard work is done on a daily basis, locally as much as nationally. But walking together the journey on this is really important. And those young women in that photograph had their own challenges along this way and have left now going out into the world in professional spheres and university spheres to face down with confidence, proud of who you are, the difficulties that they come up against. The third principle is about creativity and your ability to be able to think imaginatively, to be able to imagine the future for yourself and for others, to be able to think critically about that, and to be proud of who you really are. There's another example of Islamophobia, and one of the things that that the girls have done recently with us and with my colleagues is to think about writing a play using one of the most important key English texts in English literature, which is Henry V, and to go out and really send a message very, very strongly, not just in Edinburgh to the International Arts Festival where they took this, but to others where they've performed this, about the importance of identity and being proud, and being able to state quite politically challenging things to our society from the stage, in a way which people will understand. And it has an enormous impact on people of all kinds who watch this, not just in the places where you would expect. So having your inner strength, working together on projects, art projects, developing your sense of self, your spiritual, moral, and social and cultural identity, all happens through self-expression. And the arts give you a confidence in that, which is really important. So on the next slide, one of the things that goes alongside the arts work is a very strong conference program, and I believe it's really important for girls to understand that there are women out there who will extend a hand to them, who will mentor them. So we've had a number of conferences for girls specifically. We also have them for girls and boys, because it's important for girls and boys to argue together and to debate together, and for boys to know that girls are not a soft target, that they can argue and compete together. And girls get a great deal of confidence from that. So we also have other conferences. But in this case, the Partnership of Equals website that we have, we've created resources over 10 years, which you can use, you can download, you can access those. They are completely free to anyone who wants to use them. And they are examples of the way in which we have worked and developed learning resources, both to train teachers and to help girls in all sorts of aspects of being a powerful woman. The fourth principle that we have is about leadership, and again, mentoring is very important in this. So going to the Women of the World Festival, I know that that colleagues here are planning to attend that in March. The Women of the Future Awards, of course, is held in Singapore in March. All of these things have been fundamental to us in terms of being able to demonstrate what great leadership is like, and also to be able to find your own kind of leader. So it isn't just being a prefect, although that's very important. It isn't just being a mentor. There are all sorts of other ways in which you can develop your leadership. And one of the best ways is actually to do that collaboratively and to work amongst yourselves. So on the next slide is another example of a project which I can unpack a bit more in the workshop this afternoon. But the Girl Leading Programme, and there are a number of impact studies that I've brought with me, has been critical for my girls working together with other girls right across the country to learn from each other and to develop stronger leadership skills together. So how you organise yourself, how you have the voice and visibility is very, and how you develop that in your school, the opportunities for that means that you can send out young women who are the means of their own change. Now, there's a final couple of things that I want to say that I think are really important, and that's about, again, about context a bit, but it's also about family and community, because family and community is incredibly important in all of this. Divorcing students from a family context, wherever that is, in whatever part of the country or part of the world, is not going to be constructive. And one has to work at this very subtly and sometimes and very visibly and powerfully in others to ensure that families and their daughters come on this journey together. And that's done in all sorts of different ways in school. Lots and lots of different sorts of ways in which families and their daughters do things together. You know, if it's going to Edinburgh, we took families with their daughters to Edinburgh to university to stay overnight to experience what a university is like, also to Cambridge. And we've worked hard at suspicion of the arts and arts education particularly. And now actually our families are, we've had written and performed our own community opera, which was families, staff and students working together to write and perform that opera, which was about one of our cleaners, a white woman who was the first white woman to marry a Bangladeshi man who came over on the ships to the docks, and that whole story being central to our community. So we wrote an opera about that together and performed it together. It goes as far as that and into opportunities for employment as well. So just a couple of things about impact. Does it have an impact? There is a slide there which shows impact in qualifications and progress. And this year we were in the top 130 schools out of 3,500 in the country. But more importantly, I think, is the next slide, which is about what young women say about their opportunities and what it's meant to them. And on the next slide, you'll find quotations from girls talking about why it matters, why it really matters. So finally, just to say then, you know, there's still much to do because every cohort of girls is different. The challenges we face, we continue to face from fault lines in our society in the UK are still with us. But this is a human right. The education of girls, the high quality education of girls is a human right. Changing laws is just where you start, but changing practice takes longer. And it's the work, the life's work of many of us at the girls' school. But it does take you places that you never thought you could go. And that doesn't just go for the students, it goes for me. I include myself in that. And here I find myself today talking about this, and I would like to thank you for that opportunity. I will take this back, and we will use this opportunity and all the learning that I gain from this conference over the next 2 days to ensure that we go further still. Thank you very much.
That slide where we had the girls coats, the second last slide, I think. Was it 14? Slide 14. Because that was really good, and it kind of went off. Now we don't have it at all. Anyway, I'm sure we can make the slides available. Okay, slide 14. We want to read what the girls had to say themselves, since they can't be with us. There we go. Right. Okay, all right, anyway. That's the slide. Yes, thank you. Just leave the slide on for a little bit. I think it's great that the vocabulary gender equality is already in the gender equality is in the vocabulary of young girls, and I'm sure we've got many questions around that. And I also saw journeying together, sisterhood. So that's amazing. Perhaps the Ministry of Women can do something with young girls, workshops all over the country. She's still there? Yeah, okay. Right. Our last speaker is Miss Elizabeth Weir from Canada. She was an MP for 14 years, and she'll be sharing with us her thoughts around all politics is local.
Thank you very much, Ivy, and it's wonderful to be here back in Malaysia again. I do have to say that as a former parliamentarian in a former parliamentary chamber with no speaker, that I'm going to break the rules and actually talk about 2 case studies I think that may provide some thoughts for you as you continue your important work. So, you know, the world has seen in the last 30 years some profound, incredible, and peaceful democratic transitions. There's been the Velvet Revolution, the Rose Revolution, the Orange Revolution, but I want to talk to you about another revolution that isn't as well known, and it's a revolution that took place in Canada, a revolution around gender equality led by women. So I like February. February is my birthday. February is also Valentine's Day, right? Well, 38 years ago, Canada had its revolution, and we call it the Valentine's Day Revolution, because on Valentine's Day in 1981, 1,300 women descended on the Parliament of Canada to insist that we would have language ensuring gender equality in our Constitution. Like Malaysia, Canada, well, we were a colony of not just one colonial occupier, but 2, so we had both France and England. And as a consequence of being a British colony, we were left with the British system of constitutional law, which was not to have a written constitution. But after our 100th birthday, we began to have a conversation as citizens about the need to have an independent Canadian constitution so that our Supreme Court decisions didn't have to go to the House of Lords in the UK for final approval, among other things. And so we began to write a constitution, which was challenging in a federal state. Malaysia is a federal state. There are many interests that have to be balanced. But as part of that, there was an intensive discussion, consultation, work being done between women's organizations in Canada and the drafters of the Constitution to ensure that language on gender equality we would see in our Charter of Rights in the Constitution. We discovered, to our great shock and horror, at one point, quite late in the process, that the language on gender equality was going to be dropped from the constitutional draft. And that spurred, in my view, the most remarkable political collaboration that I've seen in our country. And that's what drove those 1,300 women. This is 1981. We have a huge, enormous country. They came to Ottawa mostly paying their own way to get there. This was before we had WhatsApp. This was before we had Facebook. This was before we had all those wonderful social platforms that make it challenging at times, but make it much easier to organize. And so they came to Ottawa. It was the first public conference ever held in our parliament. And for 2 days, women from coast to coast to coast, because we've got a lot of coasts in our country, women from coast to coast to coast talked about what they wanted in terms of language in the Constitution. And the most remarkable thing was, at the end of that time, there was an agreement on what the language should be. And there was an agreement on the kind of plan we needed to ensure that that language would be in the Constitution. That was the first of really a year-long intensive collaboration between women in civil society organizations, women from all our political parties represented in the House of Commons, in the political parties as well, working collaboratively, relentlessly, to make sure that we would have the constitutional guarantees that we needed as Canadian women. And in the end, we were successful. And that language in sections 15 and 28 of our Constitution is there as a platform, has been particularly important for Indigenous women, for ensuring property rights. But I raise this wonderful example that not that many people know about because to me it was such a statement of the profound effect of women in civil society working together with elected women and women in political parties. And I am convinced that we could not have been successful if we weren't able to maintain that collaboration. And so here are, I think, 3 of the important elements, and you're hearing echoes, I think, of this in a number of the presentations and comments that have been made. The first is we found ways to resolve disagreement. I mean, you can imagine that this was a very challenging process to go through, but we needed to maintain our ability to speak to each other, and if there were issues that they needed to be addressed. And so that happened. We were able to, most importantly, secure agreement on what the actual language would be that we wanted in the Constitution. And so that just made a platform for collaboration so much more accessible and so much more possible. And the other was acknowledging that we needed to identify allies. And we needed to ensure that we had men working with us and doing the appropriate things that we assured them that they needed to do to make it successful. So the combination of being able to maintain internal cohesion, allies, and that collaboration was simply key to the success that we had. So that is my example of changing structures outside of the political parties that we all, or many of us, work in. And this is going to echo Margaret's comments, rather. Those of us who are members of political parties, we need to challenge our parties to do a better job on gender equality. And so in my situation, our party, after being a social democratic party committed to social justice, equality, all of that shouldn't be an issue, we decided that we needed to change the constitution of our party to ensure that in each decision-making body of the party, at least 50% of the members were women. This took us about 6 years to actually do. It was a long, contentious, and often difficult, again, process, because we needed to change our party constitution. We had to get over 2/3 of a vote at convention. We needed male allies. But in the end, we did it. And what did it do immediately? It dropped the age of our national executive by over a decade. It meant immediately at the first meeting that daycare expenses were covered. And thirdly, it built a platform for women to be able to continue their collaboration at the national level in a geographically challenging country. So those are my 2 case studies. I have broken a 3rd rule, and I've gone over time, so thank goodness the speaker isn't here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was very inspiring. And yes, we all do know, some of us here, Cecilia, Zaina, and everyone, how we worked through faxes, right? And we also have our own interesting story about how we got Article 8 recognizing gender. You know, you just go and talk to Mira over there. She knows all about it. So thank you very much for that. So we have time for about 2 to 3 questions for the speakers. Remember that we are going to be in work groups where the speakers are going to be in different groups where you can talk to them directly. But let's have a couple of questions, and after which we will adjourn for lunch. But before that, we'll brief you about the workshops and who's chairing. And, you know, and I want to thank in advance the members of parliament who are helping to chair these work groups. So any general questions? There's one over here, Zaina, and then Liana. Anybody else? Only 2 questions right now. Sorry, but, oh, Cecilia's here. Sorry, Cecilia. Right. Shall we start with Zaina? There is a mic there, I think. Introduce yourself, please.
change, and because many of these initiatives are led by men. In the Malaysian context, we are devoid of, very little religious leaders that support change. Our political leadership have no courage. The minute people speak in the name of Islam, say no, there cannot be gender equality because it's against Islam, then everybody retreats, and Maria alluded to that in terms of the issue of child marriage, even though the majority of Malaysians want 18 to be the minimum age of marriage, but our political leadership is retreating. And of course, it's women and women's groups who are leading the change. We have very few men who are at the forefront of change. So we have some really huge challenges and huge elephants in the room that many of us at the political leadership level, because we're in parliament, do not have the courage to deal with. So it's so important, that this conference is taking place so that all these energies for change, that we have that courage to build that political leadership and the political will that is so needed for change to take place.
Thank you, Zaina. Thank you. I'm not sure whether there's a question in there, but but certainly there is an urging. We're urging people, to listen and to come together. Liana, can I have your question, and then Cecilia? We'll do all the three comments and questions, and then we'll turn to the speakers to see if they want to comment.
Hi, I'm Dr. Liana Khairuddin with the Asian Strategy and Leadership Institute. I'm also a member of Sisters in Islam. It's hard to follow Zai, of course, because along the way, that is actually just one of my questions. But my question to the panels is, the best thing I think that came out of the Trump administration is this kind of revolt by women in America. So my question is, do we need a big event like that to kind of push women to actually take action, especially politically?
Right, do we need a birthday women, is it? All right, thank you, Liana. Cecilia? You have to stand, Ma, because otherwise I can't see you. Remember, pretend you're a member of parliament. Yeah, Tunisia. Question to Tunisia. Right, okay. So basically there are two questions, comment and a question to Tunisia. Sorry? Can you repeat that question? Was there can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, in terms of opposition, to the wonderful laws and the reforms that you had, was there any conservative backlash, and how did you actually deal with opposition? I'm sure there must be, right, from men and women. So it's to learn from Tunisia.
Okay,
Thanks.
so if I can sum up, there are basically three questions. One open to the panel about political leadership stepping up, in the face of, even though people want the change, but they're still not having the courage to bring about the change. Even in child marriage, even the children are speaking up. Girl Guides Association also went into, to appeal for a child marriage age change. The other question about Liana is open to all the panel speakers. Do we need a revolution? Do we need women to go out on the streets, go out to the steps of parliament, that kind of global movement, perhaps even a global strike, in order to bring about change? And finally, a specific question to you, and maybe we can start with you, Najib, on what was the opposition like? And
okay, thank you both for the interesting questions. Yes, I know. Stand up. Yeah, okay. Then I will be very far from this one. Yeah, okay. Thank you for
speaking to the mic.
Already. Okay. So the second question, let me start with it. You asked about the opposition. Of course, there is opposition, and there is still opposition, and there are people who are still, until now, not happy with the reforms that happened and that took place in 1956. I mean, people are still contesting the Code of Personal Statehood, even after more than 60 years of its application. But those are, their number is very limited, seriously. Those who are against come from both the religious background, from the political background, and in society, of course. But their numbers are limited, and they are not influencing because of the capacity of the other leaders who could lead that change of convincing. And they have used media, they have used civil society, they have used the political party. I mean, the biggest political party in Tunisia that brought the constitution and that remained in power since 1956 until 2011, have offices all over the country and could convince people and could use those offices and those sympathizers to make advocation for the changes that they want to do. From the religious leaders' point of view, there was a small minority of those who are opposing, but a majority of those who are pro those changes because of the way they have interpreted the religion itself and the way they have interpreted the Quran and the Sunnah, both. And they have been able to prove that those changes are derived from the Islam itself, and that it is the will of the religion to impose, for example, equality, to give more rights for women, to prohibit polygamy, for example, etc. For the other questions, you said that there is no civil society, there is no audacity within politicians, etc. I mean, the 4 elements that I mentioned for Tunisia are a bit missing here in Malaysia. I think we have to look for what is motivating each one of those actors to adopt such policy or another policy. I mean, all these politicians want to be elected by the end. So if you can convince them that it is the society that wants a change to take place, then they will do it to please the society to get re-elected, to get elected in the beginning and then to get re-elected again. So it's the civil society that has to work on the grassroots and then to convince the politicians that that is the will of the electors, and then the politicians will act by themselves for their interest, I think.
Any of the panel speakers would like to make a comment around Liana's question around women's movements or women's protest, and also Zaina's comment about, you know, by the time you arrive at university, you're already saying at that time that you do not believe in gender equality. So is there any response to that? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Those were amazing questions, and I think we're hesitating about giving a response because there is no comprehensive response to such challenging questions, and I think we all share those challenges. I mean, it illustrates, I think, that the depth of the inequality that women face is still profound in society, and the change that we represent is also profound, which is why it's difficult and why you get opposition. And I think you get backlash and opposition in many societies about some of the progress that has been made. And we still have to work very hard to maintain that progress. I mean, my reflections would be, for what they're worth, given the scale of this, is that, I mean, essentially what we're trying to do is change the culture, the conversation, and change the culture. And that's a big, big step. It needs systematic, sustained action on all fronts. And we must keep organising as you do. We must keep articulating the experience and putting forward our challenges and being ready to take on opposition to our agenda, wherever it is. I mean, the women in America are inspiring at taking on Trump, and we've seen some benefit through what's happened now in the recent elections. And at least, you know, we can organise our own backlash, if you like, and we must be prepared to do that. When you raise the question about democratic leadership and the lack of courage on the part of politicians, and you know, I think we're seeing democratic challenge in many societies. When I look what's happening in Britain just now about some of the challenges we're facing in terms of capacity of democracy to answer some of the challenges that are out there. It shows that the need for democratic roots within our society are so important, and parliamentary action on its own is never going to be enough, that we must organise within society as well. And I think there's evidence for that. I have always believed that the organisation of women in democratic societies has got roots into families, has got roots into communities, has created a different kind of dialogue, and we need to take much more of that into the political system. And if the political leadership can respond more creatively to that, I think maybe there are some answers there. But at the root of it all, I think it's just that basic principle of women having their own voice, standing up for their rights, organising to demand those rights, and insisting that the political system changes, and changing the political system to meet their needs is actually part of the answer here. You know, it won't ever solve the answer. We've got a long way to go, but I think that's fundamental to part of what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you so much. Any other comments? Victoria?
I mean, I would
Vanessa,
completely. It's fine.
Sorry, Vanessa.
No problem. I completely support what has just been said. Actually, when I put my hand up to respond to this, I was thinking about two things really. The first is that, you know, you do need the structural changes, you do need the law, but you do also need people who are prepared to really work at this on the grassroots level. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned is that, you know, you can have a curriculum structure which says, yes, you must teach dance, you must teach arts, you must teach music. But actually, if that's not supported locally, then you face the same kind of struggles to deliver that, and your work then becomes much more about relationships and about how you negotiate change. And that's why I think negotiation skills are so important for women in this sphere, because yes, you do need those that will go out and walk the streets. There was one moment about 5 years ago when my students appeared at the front of a large column of women marching across, I think it was London Bridge, to release doves with, I think it was Bianca Jagger at the front with them, you know, and I was really worried that actually we were going to be plastered all over the front page of the Evening Standard. You know, I didn't want to stop them because, you know, they deserve the right to have a voice, but I could just see the popularity of, you know, this school that encourages women to be strident feminists, you know. Whilst that's nothing to be ashamed of, the sensitivities of balancing and negotiating around ever-increasing freedoms is really important. So, yes, the structural change is necessary, but you do need this work through education and through working directly with families and through real understanding, so that you're not frightening, so that work isn't frightening. It's not disruptive. In a way, of course, in the long term, it is disruptive because you want those women, those young women, to be able to go into Parliament and lead. But you can't be frightening at the moment when you're doing it. You can't be frightening to families that you're going to disrupt. So, you know, in a way, the work is much more subtle. You've got to really get change right on the ground by constantly talking and working with people.
Thank you, Vanessa. Right. I think we need to do all of it. The protests, the marches, the strikes, the negotiations, you know, the dialogues, all of it. I think we cannot let up at all. And so thank you very much for your comments, and especially about young people. I think we need to really work with young people so that they are unafraid while negotiating, you know, with the family and the community. But, you know, we have to start somewhere, and I think young people are a great way to start. So with that, I'm going to go now into the work groups. Shannon's going to talk to you a little bit about what happens in the work groups. But I wanted to first of all thank the members of Parliament and the Aduns who have volunteered, including ministers who have volunteered to co-chair the work groups. So thank you very, very much. Of course, to my friends from civil society, thank you so much for staying on. Please stay on till the very end tonight, because there will be a dinner tonight at 6:30 where you're going to have more opportunities to interact with our speakers and with each other. So for our work groups, basically it'll be organized mirroring the speakers. So for advancing women in positions of power and authority, the Honorary Rushanara Ali, an MP, and Margaret Curran will be the co-chairs. Am I correct? That's right. So that's advancing women in positions of power and authority. You'll do the sign up when we go for lunch, and we'll give you instructions about lunch in a short while. For changing laws and policies, the co-chairs are Najib Jeridi and Tan Beng Hui. Where are you, Beng Hui? I'm not wearing my glasses, so I'm assuming that you're somewhere out there. Changing minds and beliefs. Maria Chin gives apologies. She's unable to stay back. However, we've got our YB Janine Lasimbang, Assistant Minister of Law and Native Affairs, Sabah, who will be co-chairing together with Bim Raska, who's the Executive Director of RSCD India. And finally, for investing in girls, what is more appropriate than to have the Deputy Minister for Education? We're going to start a revolution with the girls. YB Teo Niching and Dr. Vanessa Ogden will be co-chairing that session. So Shannon will brief. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. All politics, sorry, Elizabeth. You will be co-chairing with YB Nuruleza. Where is she? Is she in the house? My glasses, I can't see anything. Yeah, okay, there you go. So everybody's in the room. So you go for lunch, and then you sign up and follow, and there will be people who will lead you to lunch. Because lunch is across the other building, and there's an easy way out there, but you have to climb up a spiral staircase. So don't go rushing out. There are people to lead you. Now, Shannon's going to talk to you a little bit about what happens in the work groups.
Just very briefly, so sign up for the session that feels most relevant to what you're working on or what you want to accomplish. How you and the co-chairs structure the session is up to you. There are a number of suggested questions to explore that your co-chairs have in a briefing note. These are around identifying challenges, identifying where opposition is coming from, and can it be transformed or neutralized? Where is support coming from? How can you amplify that support? What additional research or information do you need? What other tools do you need in your arsenal? Identifying what has succeeded and how this happened, and what can be done to shift attitudes, right? The biggest, how do we help to shift beliefs and attitudes to create a more enabling environment for the type of positive change we're talking about? Again, how you shape these discussions is up to you, but what we're trying to do is avoid a circular conversation where we just catalog what's wrong and we never break out of what we're going to do, right? It's okay, as Margaret just said, these are complex situations. There is not a single answer to any of these, and it's okay if at the end of this, you don't have the perfect solution written down. That's not why we're here. But we're endeavoring to identify baby steps, learning points, and areas where we can support each other to help along this pathway, okay? Thank you for everything you have brought to this conference so far. Lunch is, as Ivy said, in the building across the way. We will show you where to go, get a bit of fresh air on the way, and we'll see you in the working groups.
And the working groups are also in that part where the lunch is. There are separate rooms with separate signs, and the parliamentarian, the staff will help us to find their places. But go and have lunch first.
Thank you.
Just follow the usheress. Is this across the building and up a spiral staircase? Sorry? Oh, can you leave things behind? I